People thought, well, I just want to be known as an artist, you know. And I think I think she found that a challenge, you know. She actually got quite a bit of positive art reviews from very well-known local writers and critics. Thomas Albright, who used to have a regular column with, I think it was the Chronicle, thought highly of her and wrote her up in a few articles and included her in a book that he wrote on Bay Area figurative artists. Some of her early work included figurative painting and line drawings and things like that. But her teaching, actually, what she was taught when she went to the what we know as the Art Institute, was abstract expressionism. So, I think she was trying to figure out how to, develop that as her visual language. And then I think later, as she began to explore her own cultural roots, largely by going to China, then she began to integrate, the abstract expressionism that she sort of grew up with as a student, and fusing that with the calligraphy that she learned while she was in China. Because having been brought up largely in white middle-class homes, she was a bit cut off from our Asian cultural heritage. And so I think in her explorations, she was really trying to seek her identity and figure out who she was. And some of that, I think, is apparent in the way her art developed. If you look at her work now, her later work, and that's actually, I would say mid-90s or so, you can see the influence of the calligraphy that she was experimenting with. And I think for those who have an understanding of Asian and Chinese art, I think you may see traces of that kind of influence in that later work. It was, it was a fusion of Western and Eastern imagery, but using an abstract way of presenting her developing palette, and that was what came toward the end of her life. I found that she was a mentor. She may not have realized that. I think she was so busy, doing the things that she was trying to do to develop her own art. I don't think she realized the impact that she had on a group of us the ones that are the most supportive of, ensuring that her contributions to the cultural landscape don't disappear completely. I think I found her inspiring as a model because she was so passionate about her work. And I think in a lot of ways she sacrificed a lot of with her choices to continue with her art and everything. She never made much money off her art, and she took on a lot of odd jobs, as many of us have, in order to survive as an artist. And I found that inspiring because it's so difficult. I know a lot of artists who, give up on developing their own art because it's just too difficult to survive that way. So they take jobs that really take them away from their own art. And that did happen to her too, but somehow she found a way to balance that out. And I admired her for her passion and commitment to her art. She was unwavering in that respect, and yet she still also had a passion and commitment to supporting the community arts programs and nurturing people along. She was known to be part of a group of people that helped at-risk youth. In the documentary, Flo Oi Wong, another mutual friend of ours, talks a little bit about that when gangs were running around in Chinatown, and Bingo was part of the neighborhood arts programs, and she was able to encourage some of these young people to essentially give up their guns and start a training as artists and focusing on less violent activities and things like that. So I found that very inspiring because it's not an easy task to take on. Floy Wong, who is a mixed media installation artist, she was a very close friend of hers. Nancy Hom, who is a local artist and had been involved for many, many years with Kearney Street Workshop. She was one of the early members and was its executive director for quite a few years. She was interviewed. Alexa Young, who is the executor to the Bernice Bing estate and probably was one of the ones that knew her the longest of those who are still around now. She actually knew her from her Chinatown North Beach era. They spent a lot of time at the old spaghetti factory where Bingo had a studio upstairs in the rafters, and actually had visited her when she had her little spot in the Sunset and had that little alternative gallery. They called it the 1322 Noriega Street Gallery after the address. Let's see, Frida Weinstein, who was a good friend of hers, speaks, and another longtime friend, Jenny Strip, is also interviewed, as well as Jen Banta, who is the project director for the film, because when she learned of Bingo's history, sort of inadvertently, she was working down at SOMARTS, the former South Market Cultural Center, and she saw a painting that was stored there and inquired, and ultimately it led to her doing her master's thesis some 10 years ago. And so that sort of, raised the profile a little bit further because it allowed us to, talk a little bit more about her. A symposium was held. We had also, some of us had gotten a piece into the De Young Museum. They have an early work of Bingo's in their permanent collection. It was titled Maya Kamis No. 3, and it was done in 1963. And so there was about, quite a few people. I can't name them all right now without referencing my notes, but there were over half a dozen people involved with being interviewed for the film project, people who knew her. Some of Bob Shang's photos, early black and white photos of her from the 90s, is included to give some context. And he's a local photographer. So in a sense, we included a lot of our Asian American artist friends to tell the story because we were the closest to her and knew her history. It was one of the first families that grew up in the Richmond, which wasn't white at the time. My family moved out there in 1951. I was born and raised in San Francisco. My dad was a mathematician, and he was able to get a spot in San Francisco after trying to find a home down the peninsula. But in that era, it was very difficult for people of color, Chinese and etc. And the first place that he had tried to put money down, he was practically run out of town, essentially, is what happened, and he lost his money. But then he went through a third party, and this is what was going on then for Asian Americans and others who had enough money to put money down on a house. Often what they did was they went through a third party to conceal the fact that it was an Asian family coming into the neighborhood. And he was told that there was a spot. We grew up on 29th Avenue, right around the corner from George Washington High School, where my brother and I went to school. He was told that it could be difficult for the family, and for the handful of Chinese American families that moved out there in those early days. Connie Young Yu, I think, moved out there also maybe just before us. Merle Wu's family moved out there. There were death threats. And it's hard to imagine now because the demographics are so different, but it was an all-white neighborhood, and we grew up with that. So I went to school in the neighborhood when that was possible, and went to City College in San Francisco State. I met Bernice being much later when our activities sort of intersected through our art. I had moved to the Castro in the early 80s, around the time that she was leaving the Sunset to move up to the country. But we would get together for, AWA exhibits and planning, and we would have meetings. Originally, we would have meetings in Oakland, Chinatown. And then we would meet in people's homes. We would meet at the Kearny Street Workshop when it had a home over in South Park. They lost their home over on Kearny Street. It used to be in the old I Hotel. But Nancy and her group moved KSW to South Park, actually not too far from MoMA, where SF MoMA is now. And I would continue to see Bing when she came down from the city. So we didn't see each other frequently. I think in a way, without her realizing it, she kind of showed what is possible, because for a lot of artists, we don't get business skills in art school, and I think that's really unfortunate, because these kids get out of art school, they have their portfolio, and they're not really sure how to navigate the cultural terrain, how to get the work out there and things like that. But I think it was for me and for many of us in AWA who were a little younger, it was leading by example. And she was so entrenched in working with these various art organizations that I think we picked up a lot of, tips, insight on how you deal with organizations, that you learn how to do things on your own, essentially, how to put exhibits together and all of that, from the ground up. You can't wait for somebody to come by and teach you those things necessarily. So you kind of you learn as you go along, and by being involved in a lot of these exhibits and things, you just sort of absorb things. And I think for many of us, that's what she did. She showed that things are possible. It's not something you necessarily learn when you're actually going to art school, but you pick it up because you hang out with people who you think they know what they're doing, or they've been through it. You see how they put shows together and that kind of a thing. I think that's the only thing I can say about that, what she passed on to us.
Mm-hmm. Do you think that's her lasting?
I think that's part of her lasting legacy. Because for a long time, when she wasn't able to do her own work because she was busy, helping everybody with their arts organizations or whatever, that's what she was known more for. She was known for her community activities, working in Chinatown and helping get money for, various arts programs and things like that. And I think her own art sort of took a back seat to all of that. And maybe people weren't always aware of the fact that she actually was, an artist in her own right, unless you, were somewhat close to her. So there were gaps in her exhibition history. But toward the end of her life, she had a sort of cadre of friends who were involved in the art and were able to help her get work out there. She showed in a group show at Rutgers University. She was honored by the Women's Caucus for Art some years ago for her contributions. And unfortunately, she was not in good health, especially toward the end. She had lupus, and it really took its toll on her ability to keep going. But she kept painting as long as she could.
So people see her now today more as an icon, more as... In
a way, yeah, because, there were so few from that era and earlier. I mean, the most recent one, of course, is Ruth Asawa, who just passed. You know, fortunately, she enjoyed, the recognition that she deserved, and she was another one who, gave a lot of years to helping other people with community arts programs, and she helped found School of the Arts, and so in a way they had, and I think they actually knew each other. Although Bingo was a little younger, they had a similar commitment. And I think that's what some of us really appreciated, that they were really good as artists, but they also didn't hold back on sharing what they knew, and helping others, along, and helping them seek their own path. And so I think for us, Bing and Ruth Asawa and a handful of others, they were our pioneers. They kind of led the way.
And what do you think people will take away from watching this documentary?
Well, I hope that it will continue to inspire people of all ages about what they can do, and how art is defined, and her resilience in spite of her difficulties growing up, I think, is a model that people can see. It is possible to become an artist if that's your passion, and that there's all kinds of ways to get your work out there, and that you learn to form your arts communities, and seek your own way of defining your art and getting it out there, and that essentially you learn that you have to have a thick skin, for one, and I think that in spite of people who might have said, oh, you can't do this, or that's not the way you should be doing it, or gee, this is too difficult, or whatever, I think the story shows that it is possible to carve out a life for yourself as an artist. Hopefully it won't be quite as difficult for those who are emerging as it was for Bernice and her generation, but we want to encourage people that it is possible, and there's much to be learned from our elder communities in that regard. So I hope it touches a lot of people in different areas, community arts, or the fine arts, helping open up the idea of what fine arts is all about, and that kind of a thing. I think it's going to be an exciting film.
All right. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.